All right. Good afternoon, everybody. As I said, it's the beginning of the end, but I'm happy to be part of the end. Also, just want to give a shout out to all the presenters that have done so already, because so much of what we're going to talk about is an attempt in showing how these things can be connected. But we're going to talk about missing link and privacy risk assessments. I'm that guy, consultant by day, teacher by night, privacy 24/7. All right, warning, story may sound familiar. Your company's expanding. Oh my gosh, you're doing well. Your product's growing. You're collecting more data than you ever have before, and this personal information thing's a problem. Some of you experience this now. Some have in the past. Many will in the future as well. And there's new privacy laws that require privacy reviews and cross-functional assessments. Shout out to Delaware, I think, got signed into law today. So yay, another US state to throw things into disarray. So quick, somebody Google privacy risk assessments, right? All right, so what do we see as the most common approach to this? So I've seen it with clients, big, small, industry agnostic. There's three areas that I can classify a lot of the most popular industry frameworks into. The first is a prescribed list of controls that you should apply, and then you align those controls to your risks. That's sort of what some ISO standards do. Also how they tend to be used by different clients that will try to do so. The second type is a prescribed list of risks that you need to assess, and then after you've done that, design your own controls so that you can address those risks. SOC 2 follows a similar method to that. And then lastly, you've got a prescribed list of functional areas or process types that you need to look for. Consider those, and then define your own risks that work for your business and your own controls. However, there's one problem for all three of these things. Prescribed risks and prescribed controls don't reflect your business or how you operate. They're an attempt to get as much as possible, but all of the businesses and organizations you each work for have your own uniqueness about you. So trying to put a pre-made model and apply it to any company, there's going to be gaps and shortcomings. All right, so more missing links here. Let's shine a light on these. These are, I'll protect the innocent and not say who said these things, but these are all things that I hear regularly from organizations that say we've tried to put these frameworks in place before and they just haven't worked. The first is, how do I know which framework to choose? The talk that just went before showed some other great frameworks as well. What's right for what they're trying to do? All they have is there's a privacy law and a thing I need to do, and I need to do it now because my product's growing, and I need to address these things because legal's really loud, and I want to keep getting this revenue before I keep getting this risk conversation. So what's right for me? It's difficult to choose that, especially since what's right for you now may not be right for you in the future. Second, a lot of these frameworks will say, identify the risk as a step. Okay, can you give me a little more? And some frameworks do a good job of that, but again, they do it from the perspective of a very generalistic profile of what you should care about when it comes to privacy. And of course, as we've seen, it's an incredibly contextual topic, so it differs. How do I know when I'm done? Get this a lot. I go through the whole process, and then I'm like, did I do everything? I think I checked the checklist. I think I did all the controls. Did I do everything I needed to do? Valid question. And then I'm done. I spent all this time, I had a lot of stakeholders, a lot of money, a lot of resources allocated. What now? Typical result, budget consumed, resources allocated, team members very frustrated, and time lost that could have been better spent. All right, so getting to the solution. So over the years of doing these assessments, come across a need to make sure that these things are persona-based, just like the prior talk, and a lot of other items. And we're going to talk about why that's so important and why putting a lot of these different elements that we've talked about in isolation together can be so powerful in actually creating a universal approach to these sorts of risk assessments. Risk identification can be really overwhelming. Sometimes I'm doing privacy risk assessments for an entire business. It's incredibly difficult, especially for some of the magnitude and size of businesses. But what we're going to talk about can also apply to a department, an individual product, or an individual new use of personal data that you need to assess. You can scale these things to make them meet your needs. So it doesn't have to be this massive thing that costs you a ton of money and takes a ton of time to do. And we field tested this approach, and we're going to talk about the results that we got from that. But first, let's talk about what this approach is, which is a three-prong approach that allows us to figure out what's fit for purpose for you, for your business, for how you operate, and how you perceive risks. All right, it's three core elements, and we're going to walk through each of them. You're going to see terms you've heard a lot. Good, they should look familiar. Fantastic. The key is that we're putting these things together. The first is data lifecycle. We'll talk about that. user journey assessment, and data subject populations. Each profile is customizable, or each aspect of that profile is customizable to your organization, because all of these things, whether I'm looking at a process, a product, a department, or an enterprise, you are a unique snowflake. You're unlike any other business, and you're gonna be unlike yourself in 5 years, and in 10 years, this thing needs to be able to be flexible. Also, that stewardship is built to be done over time. It can feel like, okay, I did it, I invested all this money. Do I have to do it again? You definitely don't want to have to say that one model didn't work for me, but how do I build this? This particular model allows you to be iterative in a cost-effective manner. We'll talk about that. All right, so starting with data lifecycle. So the data lifecycle side, you can think of it as assessing the different phases that personal data is going through your environment, and it's from the point of pursuit of data all the way until it no longer lives within your environment. Now, why pursuit? A lot of legislation will talk about data collection as the first piece. If you don't talk about pursuit, you can miss a lot of the UX component. You are seeking to get data before you ever actually collect it. So when you're thinking about how do I prevent deceptive design or dark patterns from occurring within my front end, you have to think about the pursuit of data. How am I going about looking for it? So this is a sample of what a data lifecycle could look like. And again, we can do this for a business, we can do it for a product. So it can scale to different areas, but the point here is that your idea, you're attempting to identify what are the core milestones in your data lifecycle for your organization, and how do those things get grouped. So in some cases, someone may say, it's basically what we do. In other cases, they'd say, oh, data transformation and data processing are all the same thing. They're managed by the same groups. We use the same tools, put them together. Great, you can do that. That is the purpose of what you're doing here. The other piece about making the data lifecycle a core element is that when it comes down to remediation, after you've done your risk assessment, the tools that I'm using for collection, the tools I'm using for sharing, the tools I'm using for transformation, and the functions that are responsible for owning those tools, those systems, those data functions, they're all different. So when you use the data lifecycle, when you're looking at individual phases of the process, you can pinpoint what tools are involved, what groups own it, where is the stewardship, and when I need remediation in place, who needs to work on that? Instead of just saying, oh, cool, I looked at your storage, you store too much data. Can you tell me more, right? We can be very specific about where we're seeing these things. All right, so that's the life cycle, it's element one. Element two is bringing in a lot of what we've talked about and heard folks talk about when it comes to the UX side of things. You cannot miss that aspect. And there's many reasons for it, but one piece I want to harken back to was a talk yesterday that brought up Helen Nissenbaum's contextual integrity. If you don't look at the user journey, how can you anticipate what the expectations of the user are? And that's really the idea here, is for you to map out, whether you're looking at your enterprise, you're looking specific products or processes, what are those paths that involve personal data within the user experience, and how does that impact your handling of that data? So here, again, just a sample. It would be distinct to any process or any enterprise. This is for, say, an e-commerce website. And what you're seeing here is individual steps. I go to a website. Maybe I leave, I come back. Oh, I put some things in my cart. At each of these points, we as users would have different expectations about what's being collected. I would expect that when I have something in the cart and I want to check out, you're going to ask me for payment information. You ask me for payment information when I'm browsing your site, I'm going to run very, very quickly, right? So these things all need to be taken into context. So when you're getting that, not only are you able to say, okay, for this particular step of the user journey, what pieces of the data lifecycle are really being used? What tools are responsible for handling those pieces? And customize that to what you are looking at. That brings the contextual element, so that not only are we thinking like data practitioners, engineers, product designers, we're thinking about the end user. Lastly is data subject population. Sorry for anyone who doesn't like all of the acronyms you never needed to know. The legislative side is a key element. We've talked about that a lot here. This is the intention to say, who am I dealing with? And help me work with my legal team to understand what the connection point is. This set of 4 core elements is something that I've used repeatedly to be able to get to what are all the combinations and permutations of unique things happening within my product, my process, my enterprise. Data subject classification. Yes, we talk mostly about consumer privacy. Makes sense. It's where most of the investment is, where most of the existing risk is, where most of the legislative forces are. But that is starting to shift. What about how you handle employee data? What about how you handle patient versus consumer when you're dealing with health data that may or may not be in a HIPAA instance? What about business contacts, leads, sales leads, things like that? How are they being handled? For each of those groups, you've probably got a different user journey and a different data lifecycle. Data sensitivity laws are loving to say, well, if you handle this sensitivity, here's a special group of rules. But on top of that, if you handle this sensitivity of data in this region of the world, you got separate rules. And then on top of that, as we heard earlier today, it's very difficult to tie down specific business process. If you put these things together, when you're looking at a process or an enterprise, you catalog all of the different classifications of data you handle, the sensitivities, data subject geolocation, and the business process descriptions. You catalog those. That allows you to get a holistic view of your universe. And you've got it from the perspective of the data lifecycle in the user journey. Okay, so let's bring it all together. I said we did this, we field tested this. Global technology company, had a wonderful presenter here from that particular business. In the past, they leveraged many different industry frameworks. And while best efforts, they'd failed. Why? Because those models did not reflect how they performed. Maybe it got 80% of the answer, but it didn't really reflect who they were. So it was either ascribing controls to them that didn't fit, or risks to them that weren't part of what they actually do. So results from that. One, we got a risk inventory that was actually tailored to them, the way they operate and the way they see risk. Have you ever talked to a legal counsel and then talked to a different one and gotten the exact same opinion? No. If you have, you're the first. Congratulations. So there's that piece. Second, and this is a big deal, we uncovered a lot of instances of risk acceptance. We talk a lot about risk-based privacy. We also hear a lot about binary. You either are compliant or you're not. If you think your business isn't making risk-based decisions and accepting risk in areas of privacy, let's talk. There are definitely those things happening. Sometimes it's I choose to invest more or less in an individual area. If I'm looking at DSARs and I get 10,000 requests a week, I'm going to invest in a tool and people to manage it. If I get 10 in a year, manual process is going to do just fine. That is accepting individual risk based on how you view those things. And then lastly, we were able to use this to get a prioritized plan, not just for investment in where the risk really is based on how that business sees it, but also in supporting functions like internal audit. How can you target certain areas that need that kind of, that rigor, that review, that partnership internally? So I want to mention, why would this help with emerging challenges? Because you could easily say, well, now AI regulation is starting to grow. EU's got an idea. US is just debating it all over the place. There's LLMs, there's generative, there's regular AI. What fits? Well, this model can actually help you get ahead of that, regardless of what the actual answer is at the end of the day with respect to regulation. You use the data lifecycle to look at what aspects of your infrastructure handle AI-based processes and personal data within them. You can look at the training, the deploying that we talked about with the panel today, but then you pull it back to the user journey and you say, okay, where are users going to experience either AI tools with them or decisions that are based off of AI-based processes? And then lastly, identify the data subject groups. Who is actually experiencing AI-based products, decisions, and results? Are they from specific populations? Are they from specific user types? Am I consumers? Am I patients? Am I employees? My job candidates? All of those different things play. So getting started, I want to say those frameworks, they can all do very good things. They're great places to start, but as you grow in maturity, you're going to find they just don't fit you. So this can help, regardless of the maturity that you have in your business. And it's a change in mindset. It's not go buy new technology, do everything over again. This is an append to what you're doing, but it's a change in mindset, and it does not preclude any of what you're doing in the certification space. You say, we have an ISO and we have a SOC 2 and we adhere to NIST. Great, you've got a head start, but there are areas to patch there. And lastly, I want to say there's a paper that we wrote about this. I want to talk to you about this because in Shovik, wherever you are, Dr. Das, hearing it, feeling it, let's talk about it. But this will apply to what you're doing, even if it's at a small scale, to understand better how data is being handled so that you can decide how your business wants to address privacy risk. All right, got a link to the paper. Please contact me, but I'll pause for questions.